Hello, today we are going to go over life in medieval manors and towns. First off, we have to talk about the growth of medieval towns. So, we have talked already about how after the fall of Rome, people scatter into the countryside communities and develop manors. However, by the High Middle Ages, towns started growing again. There were a few reasons for this. Firstly, farmers were clearing forests and adopting better farming methods. More farming means more food, means more people, which equals towns and cities. Trading centers from the Middle East and Asia were revived. That means they were using trails like the Silk Road for trade again because it was much safer. Towns were a part of a feudal system where a monarch, a noble, or high ranking church official would basically run the town. So you still had that feudal structure in towns, the same as the manor. So the first thing we'll learn about in medieval towns are the guilds. So trade and production of goods were overseen by guilds. What is a guild? It is an organization or a group of people in the same craft or trade. A modern equivalent would be a union. A union is something that protects the workers. They are a collective or an organization, and they protect themselves against things like unsafe working conditions. So the guilds provided help and protection within the work. They controlled things like hours of work and set prices for the things that they did and sold. It dealt with complaints from the public, and members paid dues to the guild, and that was used for things like guild halls, fairs, and festivals, or to help sick members when they couldn't work. Becoming a guild member, it was a difficult process, so it wasn't easy. At the age of 7, a boy or sometimes a girl would become an apprentice with parent permission. An apprentice is a person who works for a master in a trade or craft in return for training. We still have this apprenticeship system in the United States. However, you got to be a lot older to become an apprentice. Their master would house, feed, and train that apprentice for 7 years. So 7 plus 7, 14, till they're 14. And at the end of the training, those apprentices proved their mastering by producing a piece of work called a masterpiece. If their masterpiece was approved, they would become a master and set up his or her own business and become a guild member. So once you've produced the goods, once you're part of a guild, you have to trade and you have to deal with consumers. So that's trade and commerce. Trade products were everyday items, including food, clothing, and household items. Towns had markets where food and local goods were bought and sold. Merchant fairs were held 1 to 2 times per year and would attract merchants from many different countries. So you'd have a huge, bustling merchant fair in a major town. Anti-Semitism prevented Jews from profiting from trade. So in a entirely Christian society, anyone who was on the outside of that society faced ridicule. So they only had opportunities to become bankers or money lenders. And during the time, that was against Christianity to charge money for loans. Moving on to disease and medicine in medieval towns. So people faced unhealthy living conditions, and that led to the spread of disease. There was no running water, so that meant no toilets. Instead, they used things called outdoor privies. So you can see that this is an example of a privy. It's a sheltered public toilet, or they would have to use chamber pots that they would empty into the stream or even into the streets sometimes. So those conditions, those really dirty conditions, made it really easy for disease to spread. Also, things like garbage were tossed into stream, canals, or into the streets. Many people lived together in small spaces, so all of the trash attracted pests, things like rats and insects that could spread disease easily. Unlike the myth about modern Europe, they actually bathed once a week, so they were actually pretty clean people. However, the conditions, the actual town itself was dirty. Again, this spread disease through things like rats and fleas. It was very common for these pests to carry the diseases. Many common diseases had no cures back then, such as leprosy or measles. We have vaccines for these things, or we've eradicated them in some way or another, but in those times they were uncurable. A lot of the times this anti-Semitic idea kind of came from the poor living conditions and disease that spread. A lot of times Christians blamed other groups like the Jews for outbreaks because they didn't know how diseases were spread. They sometimes accused Jewish people of poisoning wells, for example. Medical treatment. So hospitals were invented, but there were few of them. Mostly people were treated at home by their families or doctors, and those doctors weren't always qualified. Doctors combined prayer and medical treatment. They often used herbs, sometimes consulted positions of planets or magic charms. So again, not backed by science, backed by just beliefs and opinions they had. Common techniques were things like bleeding patients. So you would open a vein or apply leeches to suck out the blood, and this was thought to help restore balance to the body and spirit. Really, it just weakened the patient and created the opportunity for more infection, which isn't good when you're sick. Moving on to crime and punishment in medieval towns. If a person was accused of a crime, they would be held in a dirty, crowded jail. They had to rely on friends and family to bring them food or money, otherwise they would often starve. There was no oversight for the conditions of the jail. Trials were often unfair, but those are the things that establish guilt or innocence. So there's 3 examples of trials. Trial by water. They threw a person into water or deep well. If they floated, they were guilty, which doesn't make a lot of logical sense because if they sank, then they would have drowned. Trial by fire. This was another unreasonable and illogical way to hold a trial. A person would have to hold a hot iron bar while they walked. If the wound was healed after 3 days, they were innocent. They would use this a lot for witch trials. However, the human body can't heal a burn that quickly, especially a severe burn. So again, not a fair trial. And then lastly, trial by combat. A person had to fight to prove their innocence. So if they were accused, they would have to fight their accuser or someone standing in for their accuser. Punishment after the trial was harsh as well. So a person could be put into stocks, a wooden frame with holes for arms or legs, or be hanged or burned at the stake in front of a large crowd. This is an example of the stocks. A person's head would be put here and their arms would be placed here, and then this contraption would be locked so you can't move. Leisure and entertainment. So what do people in medieval towns do on their downtime? Well, kids played with dolls and toys that were handmade, such as wooden swords, balls, or hobby horses. Adults played, again, handmade games like chess, checkers, and backgammon. Dancing was especially popular, and festivals. They would have a place in each town to hold festivals and large-scale dances for the town. Animal baiting was also popular, but this was kind of a cruel leftover remnant from the Romans. A bull or a bear was fastened to a stake by chain, and dogs were set loose on the animal. So a very cruel, kind of barbaric practice that reminds us a little bit of the gladiatorial games. Fairs had jugglers, dancers, and clowns, or minstrels would perform songs and recite poetry. Guild members staged plays, and there's 3 specific type of plays that they would stage. Firstly, they would have the mystery play. So they would act out Bible stories, and that story would kind of fit the guild. So the Builders Guild acted out the building of Noah's Ark, because a large part of that story is making a huge ark that can, or boat that can fit, 1 pair of every animal. The miracle play dramatized the lives of saints and showed these saints performing miracles or wonders. And the last type of play is the morality play. So the morality play taught people lessons in how to live life according to church rules, ultimately teaching them Christian values, what is right from wrong. So that was medieval towns. You're ready to move on.